"You never really gave us memories worth keeping," my mother said, smiling, and slid an empty photo album across the white linen of my wedding table. My mother, Beatrice, had spent the last 17 years hiding my dead grandmother's will from me and stripping my baby photos out of every family album. Today, she made it her wedding gift. She handed my sister Caroline the matching album. Caroline's was thick. Mine was hollow. The guests laughed. My father, Henry, kept his camcorder up. His red record light blinked at me like he was filming a bird. 92 people, 2 physicians at the head table, the Episcopal priest still in his collar. I smiled. I did not cry. I did not stand up to defend myself. I just opened the back cover and let what I had hidden there fall out. If this story is already hitting you in the chest, take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your city and the time on your clock in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. I'm Petra Whitcomb, 29, and this is the story of what fell out of an empty album on my wedding day. To understand it, we need to go back 14 months. 14 months before that wedding, I spent my days in a back lab at the Telfair Museums in Savannah, restoring family albums for people who had paid to remember the people they loved. I am a photo conservator. My job is small and exact. I sit at a long oak table under a daylight lamp. I lift damaged photographs out of crumbling boards. I clean adhesive with a swab no thicker than a pencil. I lay things flat under glass. When a family hands me a moldy album from a flooded attic in Charleston, I bring back the faces. When a museum buys an estate, I document the back of every photograph in pencil. It is quiet work. I like quiet work. I have always been good at being quiet. That morning, I was finishing a wedding album from 1968. A bride from a tobacco family in North Carolina who'd been dead for 12 years. Her granddaughter had sent it in. I cleaned the wax paper interleaves until you could see the bride's face again. She had her mother-in-law's pearl brooch pinned crooked, and I left the crooked pin alone, because a granddaughter shouldn't lose the imperfect parts. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Petra, sweetheart." Her voice was the bright voice, the hostess voice, the one she used when she was being recorded by no one and watched by everyone. "Mom, your father and I want to make you something very special for the wedding. A real keepsake. I've been working on it for months." "Oh, don't sound so suspicious, honey." A small laugh. "It's a gift. You'll love it." I looked down at the 1968 bride. Her pearl brooch sat in my tweezers. "That's nice, Mom. Whatever you've put together, I'm sure it will be perfect." "It will be." A pause. "It will be the kind of gift that makes a statement." "I'm sure it will." We hung up. I put down the tweezers. I picked them up. I put them down again. Theo walked in around 6. He often picked me up after lab hours so we could walk the squares before dinner. Theo is a surgeon. He does the kind of work where you cannot afford a slip, and he carries it home in his shoulders. I love how carefully he turns door handles. He looked at my face and stopped in the doorway. "What?" my mother called. "Ah, she is making me a keepsake." She said it 3 times. She said it would make a statement. Theo set down his bag. He sat on the stool across from me. He waited. "Theo, I don't want her at the wedding." He looked at me a long time. Then he said, "If you don't want her there, she's not there. We'll tell the planner tonight." I shook my head. "You don't want her there, but you won't disinvite her." "No." "Why?" I picked up the 1968 bride's photo. I held it under the daylight lamp. "Because I have been quiet about this for 28 years, I said. "And there is something I need to do once, out loud, in front of everyone she has ever lied to." He did not ask me what I meant. He never does. He waited. "I'm going to need you to trust me on the wedding day," I said. "I trust you on every day." He kissed the top of my head. He went to get us coffee. I sat at the long oak table and listened to him walk away. Then I stood up. I went to the locked drawer at the bottom of my conservation cabinet. I keyed it open. I pulled out a stack of acid-free folders. The top folder was labeled, in pencil, in my own handwriting, Margaret Whitcomb, 2007. The next folder. Photos 1996 to 2001, 14. The next folder. Ancestry Solve. DNA results. The next folder. Caroline Whitcomb, birth record, Beaufort County, 2001. And the last folder. The thinnest. A letter in my grandmother's handwriting that began, "If you are reading this, your mother took it." I closed the drawer. I locked it. I went to find Theo, and we walked Forsyth Park in the warm Savannah dusk, and I did not say another word about my mother all evening. To understand what I'd just locked in that drawer, you'd need to go further back. All the way back. The first home I remember is not the house on Bull Street where I grew up. It's my grandmother Margaret's cottage on Tybee Island, 20 miles east of Savannah, with a screened porch that smelled of salt and old wicker and a kitchen that smelled of butter and biscuit dough. My grandmother kept a Polaroid camera on a little side table by the door, the way other people keep a dish for keys. From the time I could walk until the year my sister Caroline was born, I lived more nights of the week at my grandmother's house than at my parents'. My mother had what she called her quiet times. My grandmother called them what they were and took me home with her. I was, for those first 5 years, photographed. I remember holding a sand dollar up to the lens. I remember my grandmother saying, "Hold still, Petra. Hold still, my love." I remember the click and the white slip and the slow miracle of my own face emerging on the film. Then Caroline was born, in the spring of 2001, and our family began over. I do not mean that emotionally, I mean it physically. Every photo album in our house, and there were 6 of them, leather-bound on the lower shelf of the dining room sideboard, begins with Caroline in a baby bonnet on my mother's lap in the Savannah Hospital nursery. There are no photos before that day. Page 1 is Caroline. Page 2 is Caroline. Page 3 is Caroline. On page 8, my mother begins to label her photographs with a calligraphy pen. Caroline's first smile, Caroline's first tooth, Caroline at the lighthouse. I never appear in those albums. Not when I am 6. Not when I am 10. There is one photograph of me in the entire collection on page 42 of book 3, my back, in a green Easter dress, walking ahead of Caroline through Forsyth Park. You cannot see my face. The caption underneath reads, in my mother's handwriting, Caroline at the fountain. I once asked my mother when I was 9 years old why my baby pictures were not in the family albums. She was at the kitchen island. She did not look up from her recipe card. She said, smiling, "Oh, sweetheart, you were a very plain baby. Grandma kept the only good ones, and now they're gone." Then she laughed. 6 women from her bridge club were in the dining room. They laughed too. I never asked again. My grandmother died in the late winter of 2008. Pancreatic cancer. She was 75. She left a will, my mother said, but it was a small one and everything, my mother said, went to Mom's mortgage and her medical bills. That was a lie. I would learn that later. But that was what I was told. At 12 years old, in a black dress in the back of the funeral home off East Bay, while my father held the camcorder and my mother greeted mourners, and my sister ate a butter cookie and slept against my father's shoulder. The week after the funeral, my mother took my father's pickup and a stack of empty cardboard boxes and drove out to Tybee. She came back 3 days later and the cottage was emptied. The Polaroid camera, the side tables, the wicker, the kitchen tins, the framed photographs from the hallway. All gone. My mother said she had donated most of it to the church thrift and burned what was ruined by mold. She wore a yellow sweater she had taken from my grandmother's closet, and she kept it as a Savannah housecoat for the next 15 years. She also brought back 4 heavy garbage bags. She did not let me look in them. I came home from school one day and saw them at the curb, in the rain, and a sanitation truck swallowed them whole. The next morning, I went down to the sideboard in the dining room and pulled out all 6 leather albums and turned every page. Every page. I was looking for the cottage, the screen porch, the Polaroid camera, the sand dollar. There was nothing. I asked my mother that night at dinner, "Mom, where are the pictures from Grandma's house?" My mother put down her wine glass. She said, "Petra, why do you always have to make things sad? Eat your shrimp." My father did not look up. Caroline, 7, said, "What pictures?" We never talked about it again. I learned to live in a house with no record of myself. I learned the smell of a sideboard full of someone else's smile. I learned that when my mother said, "We don't have any pictures of that, dear," it was not the same as saying, "There are no pictures." There were pictures. They had simply chosen not to remember. When I was 16, my high school yearbook came out. My mother flipped through it at the kitchen table and pointed at a candid of me on the debate team and said, smiling, "You always make such a strange face when you concentrate." She said it the way she had said, when I was 9, that I had been a plain baby. The exact same smile, the exact same room, the exact same audience of bridge ladies in the dining room. The next year I turned 18 and I left, and I never asked my mother for a photograph of myself again. But I did not forget. I am a conservator. We do not forget. The first thing I learned at SCAD's photographic preservation program was that paper has a memory. Photographs fade. Paper yellows. But the chemistry that touched a sheet of paper in 1968 does not leave it. We can pull a Polaroid out of a flooded attic, and with the right solvents and the right hands, we can bring the face back even when the surface is gone. I took to it like a girl who had been waiting for someone to tell her that the past could be made visible again. My second year, my professor handed me a project, a family album that had been intentionally damaged. Pages razored out, faces scratched, names crossed through with a heavy black marker. "Some families do this," he said, "usually after divorces. Sometimes worse." He left the room. I sat in the lab for 4 hours with a magnifier and a UV light. The intentional damage was crude. Underneath the marker, with the right light, I could still read the names. With chemistry, I could lift the scratches off the gelatin. I brought the album back. When I handed it to the family, a woman in her 40s, who'd been the scratched-out face, she sat down on the lab floor and cried with her hand on the laminate. I knew then what I had been chosen by. I graduated in the spring of 2018. Telfair hired me 3 weeks later. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment in Starland District, 4 miles from my parents' house on Bull Street, and approximately 4 million miles from their dinner table. I did not stop seeing them. Christmas dinner, Easter brunch, my grandmother's birthday, which my mother had begun to call an unhappy day for our family, so that we no longer marked it. I went to those things. I sat through them. I left when I could. I did not eat seconds. My sister Caroline started Mercer Law in 2022. My mother called me to brag. "Petra, can you believe? Top quartile her first semester. She has the real family brain, you know." "That's wonderful, Mom. Of course, you have your own special little talents." "Yes, Mom." When my work was profiled in the Savannah Morning News a year later, a piece about a project I'd led restoring a Reconstruction-era album collection for the Telfair, my mother called and laughed for the first time in months. "How funny," she said. "You spend your whole life saving other people's pictures." I held the phone. "My funny little Petra," she said, rescuing strangers' memories. She actually wished me a good week. She said it the way you wish the postman a good week. Then she hung up. I sat on the floor of my apartment. I did not cry. I noticed that I did not cry. I noticed that I had not cried in front of her, or about her, since the year I was 12, when I had stood at the curb in the rain and watched the sanitation truck eat my grandmother's house. If you've ever felt erased by the people who were supposed to keep you, drop a single word in the comments below. Mine was invisible. I want to hear yours. And if you're someone who has done your own restoration work on yourself, quietly, without anyone clapping, type the word restored. I see you. I went on with my work. I met Theo a few months later at a museum fundraiser in March 2023. He bid on a 1920s plate camera and lost it to a dentist from Hilton Head, and we ended up at the same dessert table making fun of the dentist's tie. I am not the woman who makes fun of dentists' ties at fundraisers. He was. He found my serious face and made me laugh on purpose. We were engaged by the end of that year. The first time he came to Sunday dinner at my parents' house, my mother took out the leather albums to show him our family. She walked him through page 1, Caroline in the hospital nursery, page 2, Caroline at the lighthouse, page 3, Caroline learning to walk. Caroline, Caroline, Caroline. On the drive home, Theo, who never asks intrusive questions, asked his only intrusive question. Petra, where are you in those books? I looked at the live oak scrolling by along Victory Drive. I said, I'm not. Theo's hands tightened on the wheel. He did not say anything for the rest of the drive. He did not need to. He had seen what he had seen, and he was a man who took notes. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when my parents were at brunch, Theo and I drove out to a little inland town called Bluffton, South Carolina, where my grandmother's only surviving sister still lived. My great-aunt Hattie was 70 years old that year. She was thin and sharp-boned and very southern and very tired. I had not seen her since I was 11. She opened her door. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, Margaret told me you'd come. Took you long enough, child. Come in. Aunt Hattie's house in Bluffton was a small white clapboard with a porch swing that did not swing anymore. She kept hydrangeas in the yard. The screen door slapped behind us. Theo waited on the porch with 2 mugs of tea because Aunt Hattie said, Honey, you're a good man, but the things I need to show this girl don't need a man's eyes the first time. She took me into the back room of the house, the one that used to be a sewing room. There were 6 photo albums on a shelf. Not leather, cardboard, plain. There was also a wooden box on the floor, pine, about the size of a cake box. It had a brass keyhole and a key tied to the handle with a piece of green ribbon I recognized from the wreath my grandmother had hung on her porch every Christmas. I've been keeping this for you since 2004, Aunt Hattie said. Your grandmother brought it to me herself, drove herself down here in the Buick. She said, Hattie, Beatrice is going to start emptying my house the minute I'm in the ground. She's already started on Petra, so I'm going to start back at her. She laughed about it. She was furious. I sat down on the rug. Aunt Hattie sat in the chair. Margaret was not a quiet woman, Aunt Hattie said. Not with her sister, anyway. She was quiet with you because she did not want you in the middle. She wanted you to be a girl. She let your mother think she'd won the surface, because the surface was all your mother could see, and Margaret was working underneath. I opened the box. The first thing inside the box was a small white envelope with my name on it in my grandmother's handwriting. Underneath the envelope was a stack of photographs wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. My grandmother had wrapped them properly. She had wrapped them the way a conservator would. I would later learn she had asked Aunt Hattie to drive to a craft store in Hilton Head and buy archival sleeves so that the photographs would last. 14 photographs. A baby, 8 weeks old, on a white cotton blanket on a wicker porch swing. A toddler holding a sand dollar, very seriously, up to the camera. A 4-year-old in a green sundress at the lighthouse. A 5-year-old with both hands flat on a screen door, looking out at a thunderstorm. A 5-year-old in my grandmother's kitchen, standing on a step stool with flour on her face, smiling because her grandmother had just called her my love. I knew this child. I knew her without any help. I had not seen this child since I was 12 years old. I did not cry. I had not cried in front of any of them since 2008. But my hands were not steady, and Aunt Hattie watched them and did not say anything. Underneath the photographs was a second envelope. This one was thick. It was sealed in 3 places with brittle red wax. Across the front, in my grandmother's handwriting, Petra Whitcomb. To be read in your own home, my love, never under your mother's roof. I won't open that here, I said. Good girl, Aunt Hattie said. I sat with the photographs for a long time. Finally, I said, Aunt Hattie, why did Grandma do this? Aunt Hattie folded her hands in her lap. Because she figured it out, Aunt Hattie said. About your sister. I did not understand at first. Your mother, Aunt Hattie said, did not have your sister with your father. Your grandmother knew. She would not say. She did not want to break the house apart while your daddy was still in it. But she did not want to leave you in it without resources either. So she did what she could. She kept what your mother would take. I looked at her. She looked at me. You will have questions, she said, and then you will have plans. I am too old to make plans. I am not too old to confirm what is true. I nodded. We sat there on the rug, and Aunt Hattie poured a second cup of tea from a thermos at her elbow, and after a while she said, Bring the box home, Petra. Open the letter. Then come back to me when you know what you want. And know this. Whatever you do, Margaret is on your side. Margaret has been on your side since you were small enough to hold a sand dollar. I drove back to Savannah with the wooden box on the passenger seat beside Theo's empty tea mug and Theo's hand on my knee, and I did not say a word for the first 30 miles. At a red light on the bridge over the Wilmington River, I felt my hands begin to shake. I rolled down the window. I did not say anything. The light turned green. I drove on. That night, I did not open the letter in my apartment. I drove the wooden box to the lab. A conservation lab at night is a careful place. The exhibits are dark. The HVAC hums. The motion sensor lights catch you a beat after you walk past them, so it looks like the building is remembering you in pieces. I let myself in with my badge. I went to the back, to the long oak table under the daylight lamp. I unwrapped the 14 photographs first. I laid them out in order. I documented the back of each one in my pencil log. I noted the chemical signature of the paper. I noted the silver salts. The Polaroids were original instant film, manufactured between 1996 and 1999. The lab prints were Kodak Royal, processed through a 1-hour drugstore in Beaufort that closed in 2003. Both were consistent with the dates penciled on the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, in her careful script. These photographs were authentic. These photographs were of me. These photographs had never been altered. Then I opened the sealed envelope. There was a will. There was a letter. There was a small key on a string. I read the letter first. My grandmother's handwriting on yellow legal paper, dated September 14th, 2007, 6 months before she died. My Petra, if you are reading this in your own home, then I am gone, and your mother has taken what I left behind. The will I am leaving with this letter is the will I made with witnesses. The will your mother will show you is not. The will your mother will tell you got lost the way every photograph of you got lost. She is consistent, our Beatrice, in her way. Inside this box you will find the property deed to the cottage at 14 Coral Lane on Tybee, paid in full, in your name as of October 2007. You will also find a savings instrument in the amount of $145,000, held in trust, in your name only, at a small Charleston bank under the guardianship of my old friend Aldwin Pace. I asked Aldwin to hold it for you until you are 30, or until you marry, whichever comes first. He has a grandson named Owen who will know how to find you when the time comes. I knew about Caroline. I knew when you were 8 and she was 3. Your father knew, my love. He chose silence. I did not have the heart to make him stop choosing it. But I did not have the heart to leave you in their house with nothing. You are mine. You have always been mine. You are not the empty page in their book. You are mine, and you are kept, and you are loved. Now go and live the life that is waiting for you. All my love, Grandma. I read the letter twice. Then I sat at the long oak table under the daylight lamp and did not move for a quarter of an hour. Then I opened the will. It was 3 pages, single-spaced, in my grandmother's careful long hand. It was signed at the bottom. It was witnessed by Hattie Lockwood and Dr. Aldwin Pace. It was notarized in Beaufort County by a notary named E. Riddle on October 4, 2007, with a raised seal still legible in the corner. Item 1. 14 Coral Lane, Tybee Island, Georgia, to Petra Whitcomb, in fee simple. Item 2. $145,000 in U.S. Treasury bonds, held under trust agreement with Aldwin Pace, to Petra Whitcomb, payable on her 30th birthday or her wedding day, whichever comes first. Item 3. A small inventory of household goods. China, the Polaroid camera, a wicker porch swing, 3 quilts, to Petra Whitcomb. There was no provision for anyone else. Not for my mother, not for my father. Not for Caroline. My mother had told a 12-year-old me, in a black dress in a funeral home off East Bay, that everything her own mother had owned had gone to the mortgage and the medical bills. That was a lie. The mortgage on the Tybee cottage had been paid off in 1989, 18 years before my grandmother died. She had nothing left to pay on it. The medical bills, I would later learn from Owen Sloan, had been covered by my grandmother's secondary insurance. There was nothing for my mother to settle. There was only a thing to take. So, she had taken it. I made one phone call that night. I called the number on the inside cover of the will, a Savannah law firm called Pace and Sloan. The after-hours voicemail picked up. I said, "My name is Petra Whitcomb. My grandmother was Margaret Whitcomb. I am calling about a 2007 will held by your firm. I would like to make an appointment for as soon as possible." I hung up. 12 minutes later, Owen Sloan called me back. "Ms. Whitcomb," he said. He had a young voice. He sounded as if he had been waiting for the call. My grandfather Aldwin asked me, when I took the bar in 2019, to be ready for your call. We have been ready for 6 years. I can see you Monday morning. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen counter with the 14 photographs spread out in front of me, and I watched the light come up over the river, and I let the child in those photographs come back into the room. She was 4 years old. She had flour on her face. She had been called my love. She had been kept. By somebody. By someone whose name nobody had said in our dining room since 2008. I made coffee at 6. I drove to Mercer's campus in Macon at 7. I bought my sister Caroline a coffee in the law school courtyard at 9. She was studying for civil procedure. She wore a sweater she had borrowed from our mother. She had our mother's mouth. I left the coffee. I left my keys on the table. I stood up to go. She said, "Petra, what is going on with you? You're being weird." I said, "I'm not being weird. I'm being awake. I'll see you at the wedding." When I hugged her goodbye, my hand brushed the back of her sweater and came away with 3 of her hairs. I drove home with them in a clean glassine envelope on the passenger seat. The DNA lab I chose was a small, family-owned forensic company in Atlanta called Ancestry Solve. They handle a lot of probate disputes for estate lawyers in the Southeast. They are accustomed to a certain kind of client. I drove the samples up myself. I did not want them in the mail. I gave them 3 things. 1. A strand of my own hair pulled from my own brush in a sealed glassine envelope labeled Subject A. 2. A single hair from the inside of my grandmother's locket, the one Aunt Hattie had given me out of the wooden box. My grandmother had kept a thin curl of her own hair coiled inside her locket since the year my mother was born. I had verified the chemistry of the hair on my lab table the night before. The cuticle was old enough. The keratin profile matched a person born in the 1930s. I labeled this envelope Reference G. 3. The 3 strands I'd lifted from Caroline's sweater in the law school courtyard. I labeled this envelope Subject C. I paid in cash. I gave them my private email. I did not give them the Whitcomb name. 6 weeks later, the results came back in a PDF. Subject A and Reference G, a 99.4% match for a grandmother-granddaughter relationship. Subject A and Subject C, a 23% shared DNA match, consistent with half-sisters sharing one parent. The PDF did not have to tell me which parent. I knew which parent. I closed my laptop. I called Theo. "Are you home?" I said. "Always for you," he said. He met me at the door. He had 2 glasses of red wine and a plate of olives. He had the kind of face you can tell hard things to. He always has. I told him. I told him about the wooden box, and the letter, and the will, and the cottage, and the bonds, and Owen Sloan, and the lab in Atlanta, and the 3 hairs from Caroline's sweater. I told him that my grandmother had known, and my father had known, and I had been the unphotographed daughter for 28 years because my mother had a secret that my grandmother had refused to let her bury me to hide. I told him about the empty album that my mother was planning. I told him I had overheard the week before, through a churchwoman at St. John's named Cordelia Mailer, that my mother had been openly bragging at coffee hour that she was making me a little wedding lesson. She'll laugh, but she'll learn. I told Theo that I was going to let my mother give me the empty album. In front of everyone. On my wedding day, I told him I was going to open the back cover in front of all of them and let everything fall out. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I was done, he set his wine glass on the kitchen island. He turned his stool to face me. He said, "Petra, do you want to marry me on that day?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you want to do this on that day?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then we do both." I started to cry, finally. Not for my mother. Not for my grandmother. Not for the child in the 14 photographs. For him. He held me for a long time. He did not give me a speech. He never gives me speeches. He said, after a while, "We don't tell the planner. We don't tell my parents. We don't tell anyone. We just do it. And the day after, we go to Tybee, and you and I open the cottage, the one your grandmother kept." I nodded into his shoulder. He said, "Petra, promise me one thing." "Yes, you let me stand beside you when you open that cover. You don't open it alone." I promised. That summer, I built it. I built the binder of evidence the way I built every album in my lab, slowly, with the right paper, with the right glue, with archival sleeves and tabs. I made 2 duplicates of the will in a fireproof safe at Owen Sloan's office. I made 1 duplicate of the DNA report sealed in a flat manila envelope, witnessed by Owen and his paralegal. I made a clean print of all 14 photographs on archival cotton stock. The originals stayed at my lab in the locked drawer. I copied my grandmother's letter onto archival paper, but I also kept the original. The original would travel with me to the wedding. I called Caroline's birth records office in Beaufort County, posing as a paralegal verifying a probate detail. They emailed me the abstract within 4 hours. Caroline's birth had been registered 6 weeks after the date my mother had always said. The hospital line on the certificate was not Memorial Health in Savannah, where the rest of us had been born. It was blank. The location of birth read, "Home, Beaufort County, South Carolina, address withheld." I printed that too. In July, I went to Owen Sloan's office on a Tuesday afternoon, and we sat at his conference table and laid the whole thing out like a curator hanging a show. The will, the DNA, the birth registration, the 14 photographs. Owen looked up at me from his legal pad. He said, "Petra, may I be blunt with you? Please. This is one of the cleanest fraudulent concealment cases I will see in my career. We will recover the cottage. We will recover the bonds. We will recover damages. The county probate court will move on this within 60 days of filing. I can have the petition drafted and sealed by Labor Day." "Good," I said. "File it on the Friday before the wedding." He raised one eyebrow. I said, "She wants an audience for what she's planning to do to me. I am going to give her exactly the audience she chose." Owen Sloan wrote that down in his legal pad. He said, "I will be at the wedding, as a friend of the family, on Theo's side of the guest list." I said, "Thank you." The bindery my mother used for the wedding albums was a small letterpress shop on Drayton Street called Low Country Bound. They specialized in custom leather work. The owner, a man named Foster Boone, had bound stationery for half of Savannah for 30 years. My mother had ordered 2 albums in matching oxblood leather, with our family crest stamped in gold on the spine. She had paid extra to have her own gold-foiled label stamped on the inside cover. Caroline's read, "A life full of memories, for our Caroline." Mine read, "For Petra, a fresh start." I learned this in early September because my mother, who could never quite resist showing me her own cruelty in advance, sent me a text message. "Just stopped at Low Country Bound. The labels turned out perfect." Caroline cried when I showed her hers. So thoughtful. I screenshotted it. I called Foster Boone. "Mr. Boone, this is Petra Whitcomb, Beatrice Whitcomb's older daughter. I believe my mother commissioned 2 albums from you for my wedding." "Yes, ma'am. They've been finished for 2 weeks. Your mother is picking them up the morning of the wedding." "Mr. Boone, this is going to sound a little odd. Would you be willing to let me come in and inspect them? I am, as you may know, a photo conservator at the Telfair. I would like to verify the integrity of the binding before they're given as gifts. Discreetly. My mother does not need to know." Foster Boone was a man who had been in Savannah long enough to recognize the sound of an old story. He said, "Come in tomorrow morning at 7, back door. I'll have coffee." That morning, in his back workshop, with the lights on low and Foster Boone in his apron at the front counter watching for traffic, I took my own album down off his shelf and opened it. It was empty. Of course. I turned it over. I took out my tools. I lifted the inside backboard lining with a thin spatula. The lining was held with a contact adhesive. I had loosened that kind of adhesive 100 times. It came up clean. Underneath the lining, between the back coverboard and the leather, was a small hollow space about half an inch deep. Foster Boone had built it that way for binder rigidity. There was room. I had brought the packet with me. 14 archival prints of my 14 baby photographs, each one in its own glassine sleeve, stacked together no thicker than 3/8 of an inch. One archival copy of my grandmother's handwritten will, folded in thirds. One archival copy of my grandmother's letter to me, folded in thirds. One archival copy of the DNA report. One certified copy of Caroline's Beaufort County birth abstract. One short typed note from Owen Sloan, confirming that the original petition would be filed in Chatham County Probate Court on the Friday before the wedding, 2 days from then. I laid them flat. I lowered the lining. I re-adhered it with a methyl cellulose paste, which is reversible, archival, and indistinguishable from the original adhesive within 12 hours of drying. I pressed the lining flat with a small bone folder. I closed the album. I weighed it, 8 ounces heavier than its mate. My mother, who measured the world in calligraphy pens and church gossip, would never notice 8 ounces. Foster Boone walked me to the back door at 7:40. He said, "Miss Petra, I do not know what you are doing. I am quite sure I do not want to know. I will tell you one thing. Yes, your grandmother bound a leather journal with me 3 years before she passed. She picked it out for you. She told me, 'Foster, if Petra Whitcomb ever walks into your shop on her own, you help her.' That's it. That's all she said." I started to thank him. He waved me off. "Margaret was a hard woman to disappoint," he said. "Don't disappoint her." I drove the album back to my apartment. I left it on my kitchen counter so that I could see it from across the room. It looked exactly like its mate. It was not its mate. Aunt Hattie called me that night. She said, "I'm coming Friday." "I know. I'm going to sit in the back, in a green hat, under the name Hattie Lockwood Pace. Your mother won't recognize the name unless she's been paying attention. She has never been paying attention." "Aunt Hattie." "Yes, child." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank Margaret. I'm just delivery." I slept that night with the album on the nightstand beside me, Theo's arm across my ribs, the river outside my apartment window. The night before my wedding, I did not dream. The wedding morning was perfect Savannah weather. 68 degrees at sunrise, climbing to 76 by noon, the air clean from a Thursday rain. The ceremony was in a small Episcopal chapel on Oglethorpe Avenue at 11. The reception was at the Mercer Williams House Gardens on Monterey Square at 1. 92 guests on the seating chart, 2 physicians and a priest at the head table. I got ready in a side room of the chapel. My bridesmaids, 3 friends from SCAD, none of them family, pinned my veil. My maid of honor was my college roommate, a woman named Susanna Krieger, and she had been told, the week before, the basic shape of what was going to happen at the reception. She had asked one question. "Where do you want me standing when it happens?" I said, 2 steps behind me with a glass of water, in case I need to keep talking after. She nodded. Caroline came in around 10:30 to see if I needed anything. She wore a pale blue mother of the bridesmaid kind of dress that our mother had ordered for her, even though there is no such role at a wedding. She kissed my cheek. She said, "Mom is so excited about her gift. Don't be mean about it, okay? She's worked really hard." "I won't be mean about it, Caroline." She paused. She said, "I love you, you know." I looked at her. I said, "I know you do." I meant it. She did love me, in the way an oblivious child loves a sibling she has been told is the difficult one. She had not been the one who built any of this. She had been built around it. The ceremony was clean and short. The priest, a kind man named Father Easton, knew nothing. He gave a homily about the small acts of restoration that make a marriage last, and I almost laughed at that, in front of God and 90 guests, because a homily about restoration was the closest thing to prophecy I had ever heard. Theo kissed me. The chapel emptied. We walked out under bird of paradise petals at 12:30. The reception garden was already set when we arrived. The cake on a side table, the DJ adjusting his levels. The seating cards in tidy rows. I sat down at the head table with Theo. His parents on his side, Dr. Theodore Calloway Sr. in his calm blue suit, and Dr. Cora Calloway, a vascular surgeon in dove gray, her hands folded in her lap with the particular stillness of a woman who can hold a small artery shut for 15 minutes without trembling. My father came to the head table with his camcorder. My father had bought that camcorder in 1996, the year I was born. He had filmed every family event since. He had filmed my 5th birthday, the one in which my mother had told my grandmother in front of everyone that she was smothering Petra. He had filmed Caroline's first piano recital. He had filmed every Thanksgiving. He did not film with his eye. He filmed with the eye on the camera, so that the eye in his own head could close. He held it up at me. "Smile, sweetheart." I smiled. He filmed. My mother came up to the head table at 1:15. She was wearing a periwinkle dress and the yellow housecoat sweater from 2008, looped over one arm as a wrap. She was carrying 2 oxblood leather albums. She tapped a champagne glass with a butter knife. The garden quieted. "Friends?" she said. Bright, hostess voice. "Before we cut the cake, I'd like to give my daughters a small gift from our family, a keepsake to remember this beautiful day." I felt Theo's hand find mine under the tablecloth. I gave it one steady squeeze. He did not let go. "Caroline, sweetheart, come up here." Caroline came up. My mother handed her the thicker album with great ceremony. "For my Caroline, a life full of memories. From your first day at Memorial Hospital, all the way to today. I've been working on it for years." Caroline opened it. She turned 3 pages. She actually cried. My mother held her cheek. The garden gave a soft, approving "oh." "And now," my mother said, turning to me, "my Petra." I stood up. Theo stood with me. So did Susanna, 2 steps behind me. My mother walked over. She held up the second album. She tilted it slightly for the cameras, including my father's, which was a foot from her shoulder, blinking its red record light at me like a small, irritated eye. "Petra, sweetheart, we've thought a lot about this. You've always been such a different kind of daughter." A small ripple of laughter in the garden. A few of the wealthier women. "And we wanted to give you something that fits you." She handed it to me. You never really gave us memories worth keeping? My mother said, smiling, her voice carrying across the white linen all the way to the periwinkle blue Episcopal priest in his folding chair. So we thought we'd give you a fresh start. She opened the front cover, in my hands, in front of the 92 guests, in front of my father's camera. Empty page, empty page, empty page, empty page, empty page, empty page. 6 guests at the back laughed. Father Easton did not. Theo's parents did not. Aunt Hattie, in a green hat in the back row under the name Hattie Lockwood Pace, leaned forward in her chair. Owen Sloane, 3 tables to the left, set down his fork. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I held the album. I waited 4 seconds, by my own count. I have practiced this part in front of the mirror in my bathroom. I took the microphone gently out of my mother's hand. I said into the microphone, with as much warmth as I could manage, Mom, Dad, thank you. You're right. There should be memories worth keeping in this album. My mother smiled. She had not yet heard the trap. She heard the words. She did not hear the floor under them. Let me show everyone, I said. The ones I added myself. I closed the front cover. I turned the album over. I lifted the back cover, and I worked the loose lining up with my thumbnail, slowly, the way a conservator does, in front of 92 people, in front of a camera, in front of my mother, with my whole hand steady. A single Polaroid fell out onto the white linen first. A 4-year-old holding a sand dollar on a screened porch, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, 14 of them, in a fan across the table. My mother's face did not change at first. People with practiced faces never change all at once. They change in slices. The first slice was her smile thinning. The second was her glance at my father. The third was my father lowering the camcorder. The garden went quiet. Aunt Hattie stood up. My mother recovered first. She laughed. A small high laugh. The wrong laugh for the room. Petra, sweetheart, those are old craft photos. I don't know where you got them, but... Mom. But this is not the time. I lifted one of the 14 photographs. I turned it over. I held it up so the front row of guests could see the back. In my grandmother's handwriting, in pencil, was written, Petra at 4. Tybee, Sand Dollar, October 1st, 2000. I lifted a second. I turned it over. Petra at 3, Margaret's Kitchen, flower on her face, Christmas, 1999. A third. Petra at 5, Stormwatch from the Porch, June 14th, 2001. These are pictures my grandmother took of me, I said, in a clear, calm voice, into the microphone. Between the years of 1996 and 2001, they were stored at my grandmother's cottage on Tybee. They were removed from her cottage 3 days after her funeral in 2008. I never saw them again. Until last year. The garden held its breath. My mother said, Those are... Petra, don't do this. Hattie? I said. Aunt Hattie walked up the center aisle. She was carrying the pine wooden box. She set it on the head table beside the cake plates. She nodded at me. She nodded at my mother. Margaret asked me to keep these for Petra, Aunt Hattie said loudly to the whole garden in a clear voice that had survived 71 Carolina summers. She asked me in 2004, she thought you might try to take them, Beatrice. She was right. My mother took one step back. Hattie, you don't know what you're... I know exactly what I'm talking about, Beatrice. Sit down. My mother did not sit down, but she stopped speaking. I lifted the next thing out of the back of the album, a folded sheet of yellow legal paper. I unfolded it. This, I said, is my grandmother's handwritten will, dated October 4th, 2007. It was witnessed by Aunt Hattie and by Dr. Aldwin Pace. It was notarized in Beaufort County, South Carolina. It names me as the sole heir of the cottage at 14 Coral Lane on Tybee Island, and of $145,000 in U.S. Treasury bonds held in trust for me, to be released on my 30th birthday or my wedding day, whichever came first. I held up the will so the guests could see the notary seal. My mother told me at the funeral when I was 12 years old that this will did not exist. She told me everything went to the mortgage and medical bills. Both of those statements were false. The mortgage was paid in 1989. The medical bills were covered by my grandmother's insurance. There was nothing to settle. There was only a will to hide. Owen Sloan stood up at his table. Mrs. Whitcomb, Mr. Whitcomb. His voice carried easily. I am Owen Sloan, attorney with Pace and Sloan. I represent Petra Whitcomb in this matter. On Friday at 4 p.m., I filed a petition in Chatham County Probate Court for the recovery of these assets, with claims of fraudulent concealment and unjust enrichment going back to 2008. You have been served. The hearing is set for November the 13th. A waiter who had been waiting to clear champagne flutes set the flutes down very carefully on his tray. My mother turned a color a Savannah garden does not usually contain. I lifted the next folder. This, I said, is a forensic DNA report from AncestrySolve Laboratories in Atlanta, dated July of this year. It compares 3 samples: my own DNA, a reference sample from my grandmother Margaret, preserved in a locket, and a sample from my sister Caroline. The garden made a single sound, a small collective intake. I did not look at Caroline. I did not look at my mother. I looked at my father. The result is this. My grandmother Margaret is my biological grandmother, with a 99.4% confidence. My sister Caroline is biologically related to me by 23%, consistent with a half-sibling who shares one parent. The shared parent is our mother. The unshared parent is our father. My father's camcorder dipped. His hand shook. I looked at him gently. I did not raise my voice. Daddy, I said, I think you've been waiting 24 years to put that down. There was a small unguarded sound from my father. Half a sigh, half something else. Father Easton's eyes closed for a moment. Then my father said into the air, into his own microphone clip-on, that the AV company had pinned to his lapel an hour earlier so the wedding videographer could pick him up, into the garden, into the ears of 92 people. I knew in 2001. I am so sorry, Petra. I am so sorry. My mother turned on him. Henry, stop talking. Beatrice, don't. The garden was silent for what I have since timed, on the wedding videographer's recording, as 11 full seconds. 11 seconds in a Savannah garden in October is a long time. A live oak shifted. A wax myrtle moved. Somewhere, a child laughed across the square. My mother put down the empty album. She picked up the thicker album, Caroline's, and threw it down onto the brick walk. Photographs scattered. A glossy print of Caroline at the lighthouse skittered across the bricks. Caroline made a sound I had not heard from her since she was 4 years old. She ran. Susanna Krieger, my maid of honor, 2 steps behind me, set down her glass of water and went after her. I did not have to ask. I had a maid of honor who understood that the wedding's emergencies were not the ones in the etiquette books. Owen Sloan walked up to my mother. He handed her a brown envelope. Mrs. Whitcomb, you have already been served. This is your courtesy copy. He turned to my father. Mr. Whitcomb, the same. Dr. Theodore Calloway Sr., my father-in-law, who had until that moment not said one word, stood up from the head table. He said to the room, with the warm public voice of a Savannah man who has chaired 3 boards, on behalf of my son and his bride, my wife and I are immensely proud of Petra today. Immensely. The reception is going to continue. The cake is going to be cut. Friends who came for a wedding will stay for a wedding. Those who came for any other reason will be helped to their cars. 2 ushers stepped forward. My mother did not need to be helped to her car. She walked off the brick path on her own, the yellow housecoat sweater trailing from her elbow, her shoulders the smallest I had ever seen them, the periwinkle dress catching on a planter as she passed it. Aunt Hattie watched her go. Then Aunt Hattie turned to me. She said, very softly, Margaret would have liked that child. I said, I know. Some people will spend 28 years convincing you that your own memories don't exist. They will laugh at the curb while the truck drives off with everything you were. And then one day the photographs will walk in by themselves, in someone else's hands, on someone else's shoulders, with someone else's brave green hat. And they will set themselves down on the white linen of your real life. If anyone in your life is trying to make you the empty album, set a boundary, or close the cover for good. Both are valid. Either one is restoration. The cake was cut at 3. We did not pretend that the rest of the day was untouched. We did not have to. Theo's parents, Father Easton, Aunt Hattie, Susanna, the bridesmaids, Owen Sloan, Foster Boone, who had come quietly, in his only good suit, and who had sat in the back row, my own staff from the Telfair, and the kindest of the wedding guests, stayed. Caroline did not come back to the garden. Susanna stayed with her in a side room until her ride arrived. My mother did not come back. My father, who had been led to a car by an usher, did not come back either. Theo and I danced once, to a Patsy Cline record. The DJ knew that song was on the list and did not need to be told what to do with the silence first. 2 days later, Theo and I drove out to the Tybee cottage. I had not been inside it since I was 11 years old. My mother had locked the door behind her in 2008 and never given me the key. I had picked the lock with the Yale brass key on the green ribbon, the one Aunt Hattie had handed me in Bluffton, and walked into a room I remembered with my body before I remembered it with my mind. The screen porch was still there. The wicker porch swing was still there. The Polaroid camera was on the side table by the door, where my grandmother had left it the morning before she went into the hospital. The kitchen smelled faintly of butter and biscuit dough, even after 17 years. Theo did not say anything for the first 10 minutes. He walked the rooms with the same hush he uses in a recovery ward. He let me take the place back at my own pace. Aunt Hattie came down from Bluffton the following Sunday with a cobbler. She walked the porch. She touched the swing. She said, "Margaret would have made you take this one out and beat it with a broom before sitting in it." She made me beat the swing with a broom. Then we sat in it together. 3 women across 2 generations and a quiet act of theft, drinking sweet tea in the shade. Caroline called me 3 times that month. I answered once. I said, "Caroline, I am not your enemy. I love you, but you need time. When you can stand somewhere that is not next to Mom, call me back. I will come." She cried into the phone. I let her. My father wrote me a letter on yellow legal paper, by hand. He said he had been a coward. He asked if I would let him see the cottage one day. I wrote back 4 lines. "Wait until the hearing. Tell the truth there. Then we can talk about the cottage." My mother sent me one text message before I blocked her number. It read, "You have ruined me." The probate court found in my favor 10 weeks later, just before Christmas. The cottage was transferred to my name. The Treasury bonds, accrued over 18 years, paid out a sum substantially larger than my grandmother's original gift. I took the empty oxblood leather album that my mother had given me at the reception. I sat at the long oak table in my lab under the daylight lamp. I lifted out my evidence, every page of it, with my conservator's tools. I returned it all to a fireproof safe at Owen Sloan's office. The album was empty again. I drove it out to Tybee. I sat with it on the porch swing. I put a single photograph into the center of the first page. It was a Polaroid. A child of 4, holding a sand dollar to the camera. A grandmother behind her, hand on her shoulder. The grandmother is in soft focus. The child is sharp. I closed the cover. Some albums fill themselves when you finally stop letting other people tell you who belongs in the picture.